What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the evolution of cavalry warfare. However, first I have some announcements for you guys. So this week I'm going to have two upcoming special episodes featuring some very cool guests. Number one is going to be my uncle, Reed Donovan. He's going to come up and we're going to hop on a Zoom call and we're going to discuss literature. Second, we have a very special, unique episode with Gabe Mueller. So he's going to hop on and we're going to do a whole sports segment and sneak peek. It's going to be a Cowboys versus Raiders. Whose team will it be this year? But anyways, let's get into this historical timeline of cavalry warfare. So the evolution of cavalry warfare spans more than 4,000 years and reflects changes in technology, military organization, and society. Cavalry evolved from lightly armored horsemen used for scouting into heavily armored shock troops and eventually became mechanized forces such as tanks and armored vehicles. Number one, to begin with, early cavalry, 2000 to 500 before Christ. Before true cavalry, many armies relied on horse-drawn chariots. Chariots were used by the Egyptians, Hittites, Assyrians, and the Song dynasty of the Chinese Empire, because early horses were often too small to carry heavily armed warriors effectively. The first true cavalry emerged among steppe peoples such as the Scythians. They were like a Persian Turkish peoples who lived in the Central Asian area. They mastered horseback riding and archery. These horsemen could move rapidly, strike from a distance, and retreat before enemy infantry could respond. Some key innovations are the mounted archery, composite bows, nomadic riding culture, and increased battlefield mobility. The next area we have classical antiquity, 500 before Christ to 500 after death. The Persians, Greeks, and Romans all employed cavalry, though infantry usually remained the dominant force on the battlefield. So the Persian cavalry, the Achaemenid Persians fielded large cavalry forces, including armored horsemen and horse archers. Next, Alexander the Great, Macedonian, revolutionized cavalry warfare through his elite companion cavalry. While infantry fixed the enemy in place, cavalry delivered decisive charges against weak points. Next is the Roman cavalry. So Romans traditionally relied on infantry, the legions, but by the late Empire, cavalry became increasingly important due to threats from mounted enemies such as the Parthians and the Huns. The cataphracts. So developed by Iranian people and adopted by Rome and later the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, cataphracts were heavily armored riders on armored horses. They represented some of the first true shock cavalry. Next, we have the medieval cavalry and the knight, 500 to 1400. So the medieval period marked the peak of cavalry's social and military prestige. The stirrup revolution. The widespread adoption of the stirrup allowed riders to remain stable while delivering powerful lance strikes. Though historians debate how revolutionary it actually was, the stirrup greatly improved mounted combat effectiveness. The knight. So European feudal society was centered around armored warriors and mounted warriors. The knights were heavily armored, equipped with a lance, sword, and shield, and supported by land grants and feudal obligations to their lords. The classic knightly charge sought to break enemy formations through shock action. Some examples is how I discussed in my previous video, the Norman cavalry at the Battle of Hastings, the French knights during the Crusades, and German and Italian heavy cavalry. So some of the limitations is that the disciplined infantry could defeat cavalry, such as the Swiss pikemen, the Flemish militias, and the English longbowmen, as we see in the Battle of Agincourt, again mentioned in my previous video in 1415. So these battles demonstrated that cavalry was not invincible. Moving on, we have the gunpowder era, 1400 to 1700. So the introduction of firearms gradually reduced the dominance of armored knights, and this brought about the decline of the knights. So as firearms improved, armor became less effective, heavy cavalry became more expensive, and infantry gained greater battlefield power. So this brought about the emergence of new cavalry types. So first we have cuirassiers. So they were heavily armored cavalry armed with pistols and swords. The hussars, which originally are Hungarian light cavalry specializing in reconnaissance and raids. And we have dragoons, which were mounted infantry who rode horses but often fought on foot. So they were kind of like a combined arms in one dude. Next is the reiters, so German cavalry who used pistols and tactics known as a caracol, firing and withdrawing rather than charging directly. So, or then charging directly. So, this is like kind of like a guerrilla warfare tactic. 5. So, cavalry in the age of empire, 1700 to 1815, the end of the Napoleonic Wars. European armies refined cavalry into specialized branches. So first we have heavy cavalry, which were the cuirassiers, household cavalry, and shock troops for decisive charges. Next were the medium cavalry, which were dragoons, and they had a flexible battlefield role. And finally the light cavalry, hussars, lancers, scouts, and raiders. So like skirmisher units pretty much. Napoleon's cavalry. So Napoleon employed cavalry on a massive scale. He used them for reconnaissance, pursuing retreating armies like he does when he defeats I believe it's the Russian army. I don't remember. Don't take my word on that. And he uses them for battlefield charges. At battles like Austerlitz and Eylau, cavalry could still decide engagements. So next is the industrial age and the decline of cavalry, 1815 and 1918 to 1918. The 19th century saw cavalry increasingly challenged by modern weapons. So one example of this is the Crimean War. The famous charge of the Light Brigade in 1854 illustrated both cavalry. That's going to be my next video, by the way, the Crimean War. But it illustrated both cavalry bravery and vulnerability. Next, in the American Civil War, cavalry became less focused on charges and more on reconnaissance, breaking up supply lines, and mounted skirmishing. So some technological threats during this time period to the cavalry were the rifled muskets, the breech-loading rifles, the emergence of machine guns, and rapid-fire artillery. These weapons made massed cavalry charges increasingly fatal. So by World War I, in 1914, many generals still believed cavalry had a role in the battlefield, but trench warfare devastated mounted operations. Horses remained useful for logistics and transport, but cavalry rarely achieved traditional battlefield success as we've seen in the last millennia. So now onto mechanization in modern warfare, 1918 to the present. So the tank effectively replaced the cavalry's battlefield role. So tanks are referred to as mechanical cavalry. Tanks are able to move quickly, break enemy lines, exploit breakthroughs, and survive machine gun fire. This mirrored the traditional functions of shock cavalry. And in World War II, most major powers replaced cavalry with tanks, armored cars, and mechanized infantry units. Some horses actually still fought. The horse cavalry was used by the Soviets, by the Polish, and the Japanese. However, these units usually operated alongside mechanized forces rather than conducting medieval-style charges, obviously. Now, to conclude, we're going to look at the modern legacy. So today, cavalry survives mostly in armored units, often retain their cavalry traditions, ceremonial military formations, and reconnaissance forces. For example, many modern armored regiments trace their lineage to historic cavalry units, like the 1st Cavalry in the army. It's not the 1st Cavalry, but it's like something like that. Tanks, helicopters, and reconnaissance vehicles now perform the missions once carried out by horsemen. And the overall trend, the history of cavalry warfare can be summarized in four major phases: mobility by the Scythian horse archers, shock combat by knights and cataphracts, specialization by the hussars, dragoons, and cuirassiers, and finally mechanization with the emergence of tanks and armored reconnaissance. Excuse me. Although horses have disappeared from most battlefields, the military concepts developed by cavalry speed, reconnaissance, shock action, and exploitation remain fundamental to modern warfare.